But how do you unread something? Like, obsessed. Just my opinion. Just my opinion. You might not remember me, and that's fine because I haven't made a video in a year, and I honestly didn't know if I was going to make a video again. But here I am, talking about my best and worst books of the year. Usually I don't do worst books because I don't usually read terrible books. Usually the worst book I'll read is like a 3-star book. I don't read books I think I'm gonna dislike. This year has surprised me. I've read some pretty terrible books. Generally it was a pretty like average reading year, like it wasn't great. I read 25 books this year, which is not a lot, but it also is the same as last year. I blame publishing. 25 books isn't too bad, but it's also not great. I read a lot of non-fantasy books this year, and maybe that's what made it, because all the books I'm going to mention in my worst books, none of them were fantasy books, so take from that what you will. But yeah, just a lot of mediocre books this year. Not a lot of books stood out to me, so the books I'm going to mention as my best books of the year did stand out to me in the heaping mess that was 2023. But first, I think I'll mention the worst books of the year, because I want to end on a more positive note. So let's talk about the worst books of the year first. The first book I'm going to mention is actually 2 books in a series that I read like literally right at the beginning of the year, so I remember very little about this. I tried to push it out of my head because honestly I think it was really bad. I had really high hopes for this series. Like I was convinced I was going to love it, to the point where I bought all 5 books in the series. Like I bought the box set because I was just convinced I was going to love it. I was wrong. And that book is Red Rising and Golden Sun. Let's start with Red Rising. Red Rising I gave, I think, 3.5 stars. If you don't know about the series, it was pitched as Hunger Games but in Mars. Basically an adult sci-fi series about this guy who, these people are colours, right? So the classes are separated by colour. The red class are basically these people who are mining Mars, and they are trying to make it habitable to these other races who are better than them. And then it's basically about this one guy who's just experiences a lot of trauma, ends up infiltrating a different class. It's like a very high-paced action sci-fi adventure thing, and it's like supposed to be very serious and blah blah blah. I really like the pitch for this. I was really excited by it, but I remember being so bored by the first book, like especially the start of the first book. I was like, when are we gonna get into things? Like it was so boring, and also being inside, I forgot his name, Darrow? Being inside Darrow's head, it was rough, I'll tell you, it was rough. He was just so broody, he's so I'm not like other girls, like it was tiring. Darrow being in your head was tiring. Like I really pushed through, and then there was a certain plot point that I found really interesting. Shit went down. Yeah, 3.5 overall, but I was like maybe the next book will be better. The second book I gave 2.5 stars to. It was rough. Me and Steph both read this. We were doing a Red Rising read-along. It was so hard to get through, like genuinely painful. It was grueling. But in my opinion, it was just a bunch of like betrayal and political intrigue that was done badly. I don't think this is one of those, I don't think this is for me kind of books. I just genuinely thought it was like not good. Darrow was even more annoying. All the other characters were pissing me off. Like, the only reason I finished that book was for the live show, so we can talk about it, because otherwise I would have been a DNF. So anyway, I took all 5 of the books that I had and I sold them, so something good came out of it in the end, I guess. And then the next book I'll talk about, the last book I'll talk about in my most disappointing section, is another book I had high hopes for, like I was quite excited for, especially because a lot of people loved it on BookTube and my friend really loved it, and she's the one who forced me to read it. And that book is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. So my friend has read both books. The second book is Hook, Line and Sinker. She read both of the books and she preferred Hook, Line and Sinker, so she brought me that second book, and then I started and I was like, this doesn't make any sense, so I read the other one on my Kindle. Oh, let me show you my Kindle actually. I'm so proud of it, it's so cute. I even have the whole like clicky button thing and like the thing that attaches. Yeah, I saw those videos and I was very easily influenced. But anyway, it was very meh. Let's start with the things that I enjoyed about the book, and that I liked the small town element of it. I realised I really enjoy small town romances. It was set in like a fishing town. I love Schitt's Creek, and the main character in this book is based off Alexa. I'm a little bit Alexis. Okay, now I need to Google it, because what's her name? This is apparently my favourite show. Alexis. So that was one of the things that made me excited to read this book, and I love Alexis, and I really enjoyed like the main character, and I really enjoyed her dynamic with her sister. But overall, very meh. Like that's honestly the best word I can describe this book. Not only that, but the main guy was just so horny like all the time. Like, it actually, like, it really wasn't a cute look. Like, she ends up falling for this guy who's like the captain of this, like, a fishing boat, fishing ship. His wife is dead, right? And she's been dead for a while. And the whole thing at the start is that he's wearing a wedding ring, and she's like, oh my god, he's married, blah blah blah. But then he's like, I don't know, he's like, oh yeah, it's not that deep, like she's been dead for ages or something. He just is like, yeah, my wife's dead, but it's not that deep, I didn't love her that much anyway. And then he's just really horny. That's his whole personality. The way the smut was written, I'm so sorry, like, the smut was written so badly. Like, there were so many times where I had to reread sentences because I was like, this, I'm not a writer, but this isn't Englishing very well. It was just disappointing. I'm still going to read the second book, Hook, Line and Sinker, because I've heard good things about it. And my friend is forcing me because... So anyway, those are the most disappointing, worst books of the year for me. So let's get into a more positive, and let's start talking about the best books of the year. I'm going to start with a book that I read very recently, and I'm going to save the best till last because one of them is objectively the best book I read this year, straight up. But we'll get to that. First I want to talk about the one that I read most recently, and I'm glad I read it like towards the end of the year, Babel by R.F. Kuang. Look how pretty this cover is. I'm so obsessed with this paperback. Like, if you don't know, R.F. Kuang is also the author of Yellowface and Poppy War, and I've only ever read Poppy War by her. I read this with an audiobook, and I think that that's one of the reasons why I loved it as much as I did. Like, I feel like, considering how much I read this year and how slumpy of a year it was, like, I don't know if I would have gotten through this. Like, the text is tiny, there's footnotes, and I've never read a book with footnotes before, so I read this with the audiobook, and I think that that was the best way to read this. It's basically set in the 1800s, I want to say 1800s. There's these 4 Oxford students. One is a Chinese boy, one is Indian, one is a girl from the Caribbean, and one is this white girl. But this was a time where there were no women in Oxford, but there's this place called Babel, which is the translation building, and it's like a big building in the middle of Oxford, which doesn't exist. The author went to Oxford for uni, so she knows what she's talking about. But this was such a good book. It was very much, I feel like, a academic book disguised as a fantasy, and I think if it wasn't disguised as a fantasy I wouldn't have read this, so I'm glad it was. I think the overall story and the point that she was trying to make was made. Like, she really like had a point to make and she made it. And like, there were certain emotional like things that happened in this book that I didn't find that emotional just because I wasn't invested in the characters so much as the overall story. I still really loved it because I think that the point that R.F. Kuang was trying to make, she made it. She made it, and she made it well. It was just really, really good. Like, this is just a solid, really, really good book, and I understand why people love it so much. Definitely is one of the best books I've read this year. This book was just really a good way to trick me into reading a smart book, because otherwise I probably won't read it. The next book I have on this list is a reread, and I wanted to mention this because I remember the first time I read this, it wasn't on my best books, and it wasn't even a 5-star. I really did enjoy it, and I remember thinking, if I was to read this again, this could probably be a favourite of all time, and it was. I read that book, The Raven Boys. I won't even try to say the author's name, but you can see it right here. I love this series. I'm currently in the middle of reading the 3rd book in the series, and I just love it. Basically, it's about these 4 boys who go to this private school and this girl, and basically this whole book is very witchy, it's very magically, it's not very plot heavy. Like, I remember reading this the first time and thinking, but I don't understand. Like, I was like, this book is just vibes. Like, I remember knowing it was just vibes, and I remember being very interested in the characters. If you're a character-driven reader, that's the only way I would recommend this. Like, if you're here for the plot, don't be here because you won't find it. I remember the first time reading, I was like, this is so slow, but I'm really enjoying it, and I gave it, I think, 4.5 stars. And there were certain characters that really pissed me off, but now that I finished the series, I know that I'm like, I love these characters so much. But like Adam, who I thought his whole personality was complaining about being poor, which feels a bit harsh considering how much I know and love him now. And Ganzi, the main guy in this, who's like the leader of the group, pissed me off so much because I was like, he's just so cocky, and he basically like controls the group, but like, in a cute way. Now I know it's in a cute way, but back then I was like, oh, he's so annoying. But anyway, I love this book. I love these characters. It's honestly like a new favourite series of all time, and this book just shot right up. Like, this is like the best reread experience, and I was in like such a slump this year, and when you're in a slump and you just forget how to read, just reread some of your favourites so you can remember how to read again. And I just thought I'd mention it because I love this book. Okay, so the next book I want to mention is one I read for the first time, not a reread, and it was I don't know what genre this would be. I don't know if it's a literary fiction, historical fiction, but that book is Against the Loveless World. Basically, this book is about this Palestinian woman who grew up in Kuwait. Her family were forced out of Palestine in the 1940s, and that was her grandma. So basically her mum had to grow up outside of Palestine, and she had to grow up outside of Palestine, and yeah, just like a long line of of displacement and like growing up away from your culture, and you just see every phase of her life. You see this woman's experiences with, like, she has no attachment to her culture at the start, and she's like, what do I care about Palestine? I never grew up there. And then later on in her life you see her re-establish those roots and like really start to understand like her ancestors and like her land, and starts to reconnect. And the plot is just, I remember that the chapters were so long, but I genuinely couldn't put it down. Like, I'm such a slow reader, and I think I read this in like 3 days or something. Like, the chapters are so long, but you genuinely like can't put it down. Like, the plot is just one thing after another after another. It's like 300 pages and like so much of her life. At the start of the book she's in prison, and you're kind of like flashing back as to like how she got there, and by the end of it you understand how she got there. She goes through a lot of trauma. I would recommend looking up the trigger warnings for this, because there are some really like horrible things that happen, but it's a generally like hopeful book, and it teaches you a lot about like Palestine, even though a lot of the things, obviously it's a fiction, but a lot of the things were based on like real life. So I would highly recommend this book. Like, it was incredible and like one of the best books I've ever read. Like, now let's get on to the best book of the year, literally the best book of the year. And I read this ironically at the start of the year, literally the first book I read, and I remember thinking after I read it, I was like, how is it going to get better than this? And it didn't. Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. This is one thick book. I would use the word emotionally devastating. Like, Fonda Lee, I've said this before and I'll say it again, Fonda Lee literally could not care less about your feelings. Like sometimes you read books where it's really sad and it's devastating, but like the author comes in, like, kind of heals your wounds a little bit. This author doesn't do that. She doesn't care about you. This is one of the best fantasy series I've ever read in my life. Maybe the best. Like, the focus of this book was the plot and the world. Like, if you've never heard of this series, it's called the Greenbones Saga. It's very similar to our world, except in this world there are greenbones, and those people could draw power from jade. So there's like a lot of gangs, a lot of rivalry, and people who use the green stones, the jade, like, the more you have of it, the more status you have in this world. And there are some people who use it illegally. If you use too much and then you like stop using it, then you get withdrawal, and like it's like a drug. And so this island of basically like mines jade, so this is what they're known for, this is what makes them powerful, and this is how they make their money, this controls their economy, this controls class. Like, this is the finale in the trilogy, and it was just like everything tied together incredibly. I think this book spans like 10 years, and like to do that so well, like to think, like, it's like every single string that she crafted from the first book all connected, intertwined throughout this book, throughout the 10 years. Like, it was just like, it was like expert level. Like, I've never seen plotting like this. The fight scenes, I remember the one problem I had from the beginning, like the first book, was like, I loved it, but I think my main issue with it was like there was a lot of gang stuff, and it felt kind of trivial, because it was two rival gangs on this island fighting for like power. It's like one person, like, they fight and then they take back this street, and then this person takes back this street, and this person takes back this shop. And I remember thinking, like, I hope it gets bigger. Like, I hope that the plot gets bigger and the stakes get bigger, and it really like did. The stakes were so high in this book. But I remember reading this on the tube on the way back from work, and I was just sobbing. If you want a fantasy series that's gonna blow you away, emotionally devastate you, and then I would recommend this. Like, this is probably the best book I read this year. It was incredible, and obsessed. Those are the best and worst books I read in 2023. If any of these books were your favourite books, including the ones that I bashed, let me know. And thank you for watching. If you watched this far, am I going to make any more videos? Who knows, maybe it's going to be another year till you see me. Hopefully not. I love booktube. Thanks for watching, and